Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the renowned 18th century German writer, poet and thinker, uttered a reflection that resonates deeply to this day. There is no one more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe themselves to be free. Although these words were written almost 2 centuries ago, their relevance seems to have intensified in the contemporary context. We live in an age where freedom is often proclaimed as a fundamental and inalienable right, especially in Western societies. However, it is imperative to question whether this freedom is genuine, or whether we are, in a subtle and insidious way, trapped in modern forms of slavery that mask its true nature. The common perception of tyranny is often associated with explicit authoritarian regimes where oppression is visible and tangible. Scenarios such as those described by George Orwell in his dystopian classic 1984 paint a picture of totalitarian control, constant surveillance and brutal suppression of dissent. In this context, freedom is crushed in such an obvious way that resistance becomes a natural response for those who yearn for autonomy. However, the reality can be more complex and multifaceted. Modern tyranny may not manifest itself through obvious coercive methods, but rather through subtle mechanisms that induce individuals to believe they are free, while their minds and behaviors are carefully shaped and controlled. Aldous Huxley, in his novel Brave New World, offers an alternative perspective on how oppression can be established not by force, but by conditioning and gratification of the senses. Published in 1932, the book portrays a futuristic society where technological and scientific advances are used to maintain social order through the immediate satisfaction of desires and the suppression of individuality. In this world, people are conditioned from birth to accept their role in society, and any form of discomfort or questioning is quickly neutralized through drugs and incessant entertainment. Freedom, in this context, is a carefully contrived illusion where individuals, although apparently content, are devoid of true autonomy and critical capacity. Huxley's reflection becomes even more pertinent when we consider the role of technology and the media in contemporary society. We live in an age of abundant information where access to data and content is practically unlimited. Paradoxically, this information overload can lead to distraction and superficiality, preventing deeper and more critical reflections on our condition and the world around us. Social networks, for example, while offering platforms for expression and connection, can also serve as tools for manipulation, directing behavior and opinions in an almost imperceptible way. In this sense, technology, which should be an instrument of emancipation, can become a means of subtle control, shaping desires, opinions, and actions according to specific interests that are not always transparent to the average user. Furthermore, the incessant search for pleasure and comfort, widely encouraged by the consumer industries, can result in a form of collective apathy. When individuals are constantly bombarded with stimuli that promise immediate satisfaction, there is little room for questioning or the development of a critical conscience. This dynamic creates an environment where conformity is the norm, and any deviation or questioning is discouraged, not through direct repression, but through marginalization or ridicule. Freedom, in this scenario, is redefined not as the ability to think and act autonomously, but as the freedom to choose between different products or entertainments, all carefully designed to maintain the status quo. Goethe's reflection therefore invites us to critically examine the structures of power and control in our society. It alerts us to the possibility that we are living in an invisible prison, where the bars are made of distractions, ephemeral pleasures, and subtle conditioning that limit our true freedom. Recognizing this reality is the first step towards genuine emancipation, which goes beyond appearances and the comfortable illusions we are presented with on a daily basis. In the 20th century, psychologist B.F. Skinner, a professor at Harvard and one of the most influential theorists of human behavior, conducted a series of experiments that helped shape our understanding of how behaviors can be induced, modified, and controlled. His work on operant conditioning demonstrated that by reinforcing certain behaviors and discouraging others, it was possible to program the way an organism responds to the environment. These discoveries, initially applied to animals, were quickly recognized for their social and political implications, raising concerns about the potential for large-scale manipulation. Skinner's experiments used a device known as a Skinner box, where rats and pigeons were trained to perform certain actions in exchange for rewards or to avoid punishment. Skinner discovered that positive reinforcement, giving the animal a reward such as food when it performed the desired action, was a much more effective method of modifying behavior than punishment. This was because positive reinforcement created a lasting learning pattern, whereas punishment often generated only temporary effects, often resulting in undesirable alternative behaviors or even resistance and aggression. This concept has profound implications when applied to the control of human societies. Instead of directly repressing freedom, a system can simply make people obedient by offering them comfort and pleasure in exchange for compliance. The aim is not to eliminate freedom with visible shackles, but to make it obsolete to the point where individuals don't feel the need to exercise it. This was the great concern of Aldous Huxley, who saw advances in behavioral science as a more efficient means of control than any form of explicit repression. In his book Brave New World and in later essays, Huxley imagined a future where controlling elites would employ sophisticated methods of manipulation to ensure that the masses remained docile and content, avoiding any desire for revolt or change. Huxley's vision contrasted with Skinner's in one crucial aspect. While Huxley saw this scenario as a dystopia, a world where human beings would have their humanity diluted, Skinner believed that operant conditioning could be used to build a utopian society in which every individual would behave in a predictable, functional, and happy way. This divergence of opinions raises a fundamental question. Is it really a utopia to live in a society where our behaviors are programmed in advance? For Skinner, individual freedom was an outdated concept, and he saw social conditioning as a tool for collective well-being. Huxley, however, argued that this type of control would lead to an existence devoid of authenticity, where the population, submerged in superficial pleasures and constant distractions, would become incapable of questioning the world around them. This vision of the future is not so far from reality. In modern society, the combination of non-stop entertainment, social media, and easy consumption acts in much the same way as the positive reinforcement described by Skinner. Instead of rebellion and non-conformity, the system offers rewards that keep the population busy and satisfied, neutralizing any desire for deep questioning. And this is not a recent phenomenon. Rulers and leaders throughout history have always understood that it was more effective to keep a population distracted and satisfied than to repress their desires by force. The Romans, for example, already applied this concept with bread and circuses. While the plebs received free food and grandiose spectacles in the Colosseum, concern for politics and the power structure took a back seat. In today's world, bread and circuses have been transformed into a non-stop stream of content designed to capture attention and stimulate immediate pleasure. Digital entertainment, social media, free pornography, reality shows, and a plethora of distractions ensure that people's minds remain occupied with no time or energy to question their own condition. The question Huxley asks us then is, if we are constantly being rewarded for conforming to a system, can we still say that we are truly free? When our routine is carefully designed to keep us satisfied within a predetermined model of consumption, information, and social behavior, are we choosing freely or simply responding to conditioned stimuli? If Skinner were right, an ideal society could be one where no one feels the need to question their life because they are already programmed to find pleasure within the established rules. If Huxley were right, this would mean that we would be exchanging our humanity for a comfortable form of servitude without realizing that something precious has been taken from us. As technology advances, new forms of positive reinforcement are constantly being perfected. Algorithms study the behavior of millions of people, identify patterns, and learn how to make content more and more addictive, ensuring that we remain engaged and dependent on these distractions. Each notification, each new video suggested, each personalized recommendation is a small dose of positive reinforcement that keeps our attention captive. The very design of social networks and digital entertainment services follows similar principles to Skinner's box, where small rewards are given to keep the user interacting indefinitely. Therefore, the great dilemma of the 21st century is no longer whether we are being watched and repressed, as Orwell feared, but whether we are being conditioned and domesticated by a system that teaches us to love our own servitude. The danger lies not in an external force that prevents us from acting, but in the way our desires and behaviors are shaped without us realizing it. If Huxley were alive today, he might point to mobile devices, the rampant consumption of superficial information, and the indiscriminate use of drugs and antidepressants as signs that his prediction has come true. After all, when a society finds enough pleasure in distractions and immediate comforts, who really wants freedom? Aldous Huxley was not only a visionary novelist, but also an attentive scholar of human behavior and the dynamics of power. In Brave New World, he described a society where submission was not imposed by brute force, but by pleasure, conditioning, and psychological manipulation. Instead of repression and fear, domination was guaranteed through constant distractions, pleasures, and stimuli, keeping the population too satisfied to question their own servitude. Among the mechanisms that made this form of control so effective was a revolutionary drug called soma. Soma was not just a narcotic, but a social engineering tool designed to suppress negative emotions and guarantee a constant state of satisfaction. The drug offered people a refuge from reality, allowing them to escape any emotional discomfort or critical thinking that might lead them to question the social order. Depending on the dosage, soma induced euphoria, pleasurable hallucinations, or a deep, dreamless sleep, all without causing hangovers or negative side effects. As a result, the citizens of Brave New World had no need to rebel or protest, as any sense of dissatisfaction was immediately dissolved by the consumption of the substance. But soma didn't just bring immediate pleasure, it also had an even more insidious effect. It increased people's suggestibility. Under the influence of the drug, people became more receptive to propaganda and social conditioning, making them unable to perceive the manipulation to which they were subjected. This further strengthened the control of the rulers, ensuring that the system remained intact without the need for explicit repression. However, Huxley didn't limit himself to soma as the only tool of social control. He also explored another fundamental pillar of the system, the dissolution of traditional relationships and the encouragement of sexual promiscuity as a form of distraction and emotional control. From childhood, citizens were taught that everyone belongs to everyone, a mantra that eliminated emotional attachment and turned sex into a purely recreational activity without deep bonds or meaningful consequences. Monogamy and the idea of family were abolished, as they were seen as sources of emotional instability and conflict. In place of these institutions, people were encouraged to seek out varied sexual partners and to avoid any kind of romantic attachment. This policy not only reduced emotional tensions, but also ensured that citizens were always occupied with their own pleasures and desires, with no time or motivation to question the system. This approach is intriguingly reflected in our contemporary society. Although there is no explicit government force promoting promiscuity, the encouragement of instant pleasure, the incessant search for stimulation, and superficiality in human relationships has become a hallmark of the digital age. Unrestricted access to pornography, the ephemerality of relationships on social networks, and the culture of instant gratification have created a mentality where pleasure has become an end in itself, often at the expense of building meaningful connections. Another central mechanism of social control in Brave New World was incessant entertainment, designed to capture the attention of the masses and prevent critical thinking from emerging. Huxley described a society flooded with distractions of a fascinating nature, a constant stream of superficial stimuli that kept the population immersed in trivia. Citizens were constantly bombarded with shows, games, and immersive visual entertainment, all carefully designed to ensure that their minds were always occupied, but never with deep or challenging questions. If we transpose this vision to the present day, we see a frighteningly similar scenario. Entertainment has become one of the main drivers of the economy and modern social life, and its accessibility is greater than ever. The advent of social networks, streaming platforms, online games, and endless content on the internet creates an environment where people's attention is constantly captured, often without them realizing how much they are being manipulated. The design of these platforms follows advanced psychological principles to maximize engagement time. Social networks, for example, use intermittent reinforcement mechanisms similar to those described in Skinner's experiments, where small doses of gratification, likes, notifications, suggested videos, keep the user coming back again and again. This not only creates an addictive cycle of content consumption, but also reduces people's ability to sustain prolonged attention and engage in critical thinking. In addition, the content presented is carefully filtered by algorithms that prioritize what keeps the user entertained and emotionally engaged, often exploiting their psychological vulnerabilities. This creates an environment where critical thinking is stifled by an excess of stimuli, and where the ability to discern relevant from irrelevant information becomes increasingly limited. This process of constant distraction is no accident. It is a feature of the business model of the big digital platforms. A population that is constantly entertained and absorbed in fleeting pleasures is a population that is less likely to question its condition, less inclined to seek structural changes, and more easily manipulated. As in Huxley's world, there is no need to impose censorship or direct repression if people are so involved with their distractions that they have no interest in challenging the existing order. The intersection between entertainment, pleasure, and social control raises crucial questions about the true nature of freedom in the modern age. If people are conditioned to seek only pleasure and comfort without ever developing critical thinking about their reality, can they still be considered free? If the mechanisms that shape our behavior are so sophisticated that we don't even notice their influence, to what extent are our choices really our own? The answer to this question could determine not only the fate of society, but also the fate of humanity itself as we know it. As Huxley warned, the greatest danger of a world where people are domesticated by pleasure is not the obvious oppression, but the unconscious acceptance of a comfortable servitude, in which individuals don't even realize that they have lost something valuable. And this is perhaps the biggest trap of the 21st century, not realizing that by completely surrendering to distractions and superficial entertainment, we may be giving up the only thing that really makes us human: our ability to think critically, question, and seek meaning that goes beyond momentary pleasure. The parallels between Brave New World and the modern world are undeniable. Huxley, in his essay Return to Brave New World, published in 1958, reflected on how future societies could be led to willingly accept their own servitude. He speculated that rulers might not even need to force their citizens to consume substances that would make them more docile and suggestible. It would be enough to make them available, and the population itself would adopt them voluntarily. This thought resonates strongly with today's reality. Today, it is estimated that 1 in 6 Americans uses some kind of psychotropic medication, including antidepressants, anxiolytics, and mood stabilizers. In addition, there is a global crisis of opioids, substances that have devastated entire communities. In the United States, fentanyl and other synthetic drugs are responsible for an alarming number of fatal overdoses, highlighting how the search for emotional relief and immediate pleasure can become a dangerous trap. In addition to chemical drugs, there are also digital drugs. Social networks designed to hold the user's attention for as long as possible create an environment where dopamine is constantly stimulated by likes, notifications, and ephemeral interactions. Excessive consumption of online pornography follows the same logic, providing an endless stream of instant gratification that alters the way people perceive and experience their own desires. This combination of elements, chemical drugs, digital distractions, and behavioral conditioning results in an increasingly apathetic and submissive society. Instead of fighting for meaningful change, most people are content with the superficial pleasures on offer. And this is exactly what Huxley feared, not a world where people are forced to obey, but one where they are conditioned to want nothing more than what they already have. However, there is still a fundamental question to be considered. Is this conformity really natural, or is it manufactured? What differentiates an effective control system from a system of mere social administration is the way it manipulates people's desires. Whether modern distractions and pleasures are just spontaneous responses to consumer demand, or whether they are intentionally pushed on us as tools of control, is something that is difficult to determine precisely. But regardless of the origin, the result is the same: a distracted, unmotivated population without the mental resources to resist its own domestication. The phrase, "Give me television and hamburgers, but don't bother me with the responsibilities of freedom," represents this phenomenon well. As long as people prefer comfort and pleasure to reflection and change, freedom will not prevail. On the contrary, the techniques of social manipulation will become increasingly refined, more effective, and more invisible. This doesn't mean that there will be a totalitarian regime imposing a single model of behavior, but rather a world where human choices are carefully directed to maintain the balance of a system that profits from collective passivity. If this trend continues, we may be approaching a definitive division between two categories of human beings: those who accept and welcome this pleasurable servitude, and those who choose to resist it. Resistance in this case does not take the form of open rebellion or violent protest, but rather a refusal to be controlled by one's own manufactured impulses and desires. The real revolution may lie in learning to say no to what distracts us and yes to what really strengthens us. Frederick Douglass, a former slave and 19th century activist, once said, "When a slave becomes a happy slave, he effectively renounces everything that makes him human." This phrase echoes Huxley's main message. The worst form of slavery is not that imposed by force, but that which the individual voluntarily embraces without realizing that they have lost something essential in the process. The question that remains then is, are we aware of the chains that bind us, or have we learned to love them? If this video helped you to see things differently, if it brought you a reflection that made you evolve in some way, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps me to keep bringing you thought-provoking content. And if you want to contribute even more to the channel, consider sending a valo demise of any amount. If this message has improved your day, made you reflect or evolve as a person, this could be a way of giving something back. See you in the next video.